Hi everyone, so the Season 25 PTR preview blog has been updated. In case you haven't seen it yet, the link is in the description, you can read through the whole thing there. I want to talk about the Marauder changes in particular, because we have seen a pre-PTR change to the patch notes. That is very curious, I don't think this has ever happened. Here it's labeled as a correction, so maybe they realized that, well, this was a little bit too ridiculous, which I have to agree with. But they completely removed the 400% increased damage from the Marauder's 4-piece bonus to the sentries. So this means a considerable nerf, because with the reworked Marauder set that has the new, or old rather, auto-firing sentries and the big 60,000% damage multiplier for the sentry, it would have gotten to some ridiculous numbers that would probably outshine even the inners on the current live servers. So obviously this is a bit too much, and this is probably a good change, and I want to just go a little bit into the details of what it means exactly. So I have prepared a G3 planner here. This is a Marauder multi-shot setup. This is most likely something that we're going to play, because when you have such a strong focus on the sentry's damage, multi-shot will most likely outshine cluster arrow and pretty much any other spender, because of the interactions with their special legendary powers. So for example, for cluster bombs, the Hellcat waistguard does not work for the sentry's attacks, so there's no bouncing grenades. It's also similar with the Deadman's Legacy actually. This double hit effect does not work for the sentries, but you still get the ×3 multiplier from the damage bonus. So this double hit is not the biggest deal. It's something like a 40% DPS loss or so, so not really so great, but something like a Hellcat waistguard is obviously too much to lose in such a setup. Theoretically, you will be able to play cluster arrow setups. I might try that myself on the PTR, see how that feels. So for a little bit lower tiers, you can definitely play something very similar to the old Season 1, Season 2 Marauder Demon Hunter, but for the most part it will be multi-shot. Now let's look at some numbers here. This is a Paragon 5k setup, pretty much best in slot gear, 150 calisans, everything you would like. This is just kind of the baseline that we're gonna start with, and you want to look at the relative values between the setups. So obviously this is pre-patch, we don't have the new numbers yet, but we can look at the multi-shot damage values here. And you can see total damage per shot in no vengeance and without COE would be 1.9 trillion damage. Now this is an arbitrary value. We want to look at the distribution of the damage between the Demon Hunter and the sentries, and also how this will change in the patch. So right now we have 5 sentries shooting at a meager value of 47 billion. So this is essentially nothing. Even when you multiply this by 5, you increase the total damage down by a little bit. As you can see here, it takes the damage from the Demon Hunter and then 5 times this to combine to 1.9. And now we're gonna have much stronger sentries with this PTR update. So the ×5 is gone, but instead the sentries get a ×601 from this 60,000% damage bonus. Now if we pull up the calculator here, we can do a little bit of math. So let's do a second one, and we look at the damage of the sentries, which is 47.57. We have 5 of them, and their damage will also get cut in down to 20% because of the nerf. So it's back to the same value. So this is the base damage before the buff to the 6-piece, which we now have to do with ×601. And here we see that the damage done is roughly 28.5 trillion from the sentries alone after the patch, which is a much higher value than this total damage value that we see here. But this is not everything. We also have to consider that they are shooting on their own now. So this is obviously very hard to estimate before seeing it, but if I think about how it was back in Season 1 and it's gonna be anything like that, I would just straight up give this set something like a ×2 multiplier for this effect. So let's just take this value ×2, and it might be a little bit more, it might be a bit less. So sometimes they are shooting while you're not really prepared for it, or sometimes you can't shoot yourself, so you actually deal much more damage from the auto firers. So we'll have to kind of estimate right now what that will be, but let's take a times 2, and we are at 57.1 trillion damage from the sentries alone. And now we could also add this 1.6 trillion damage from the Demon Hunter. So let's just do this with this value, and we are at like short of 60 trillion per shot. Now it's quite difficult to estimate how much such a damage buff will actually affect the GR tiers exactly, because we can't just scale up an already known build, because this doesn't exist right now. Marauder multi-shot is played by some people, but the future patch will have a very different Marauder game style than the current patch, because all the sentries do all the work, and the Marauder Demon Hunter is just there to actually activate the sentries and position them in the right way. So it will really come down to the positioning, the strategic gameplay, and not so much the attack as much as possible to as many targets as possible. But if you just take a look at those values here and look at how many tiers you gain, this is a roughly times 30 multiplier. If you look at the 1.9 trillion compared to the 58 trillion. So this is a times 31 multiplier, and this means roughly a buff of around 20 GR tiers. And that is with the nerfed value, might I say. So now the question is, how strong is this build anyway? So Marauder multi-shot is not really played very much, but it is roughly as good as cluster bombs. Marauder, just maybe a few tiers short of that in the current patch. And cluster bombs Marauder at 5k Paragon can definitely do something like a 130 or so at the very high end. So we're looking at a 5k non-seasonal Demon Hunter being able to clear something like 150 actually. So it might be a little bit less, maybe 145-ish, but this is my current estimate for where this build will land. And it also shows that it was going to be insanely overpowered from at least what we can tell from the PTR patch notes before they nerfed it. Now it definitely seems like still it's going to be the top dog for the Demon Hunter, outperforming the God DH and possibly a lot of other group viable top builds from other classes. So we'll see how the group meta will shape up, but Marauders definitely looks still quite exciting. Now obviously we have to take all these numbers with a little bit grain of salt, because we don't know the exact mechanics yet. We have to see that on Thursday and over the weekend. I guess we're gonna do a lot of mechanics testing, see what the season theme is about, how strong it is. I assume the season theme is gonna be somewhere in the power range of ethereal items, so something like a 5 to 10 tier buff depending on build, depending on which combination of soul shards and how much upgrades and all that stuff. So somewhere along the lines, this build will definitely clear 150 with the current values, I'm pretty sure. In any case, I hope that's helped clear some things up about this PTR update. I got a lot of questions today, so I wanted to single this change out in particular and talk about it right away. Lastly, one side effect of this change obviously is also that the N6M4 Natalia Marauder combo is basically dead now, because I don't think that this auto-firing effect can outperform this current ×5 sentry damage bonus. In N6M4, all the damage comes from the sentries, similar to how it works in the future Marauders. And without this ×5 multiplier and without this big multiplier coming from the 6-piece bonus on Marauders, I don't think that this setup is gonna see any play anymore. It was already being outperformed by the N6 God 4 combo with Hanging Arrow, and now there's basically no reason to ever play it again, which is kind of a sad side effect. I would have liked to see the multi-shot being used there and the cluster arrow being used on the other, but this is what it is. Maybe it is gonna be incredibly powerful and those sentries fire like 5 cluster arrows per second, but I kind of doubt that, and we'll have to see. And that's also it for this video, so hope you liked it and see you guys next time.